Oracle bone script. In 1899, a Chinese scholar named Wang Yirong purchased what vendors in Beijing were selling as dragon bones, ground into powder and used as medicine. He looked closer. The markings on the fragments were not decorative. They were structured, deliberate, and unmistakably linguistic. What Wang had pulled from an apothecary's shelf was the oldest known form of written Chinese, carved into bone more than 3,000 years before he ever held it. The script is now known as Oracle bone script, and its origins trace back to the late Shang dynasty, with radiocarbon dating placing the earliest confirmed inscriptions at approximately 1254 BCE. The bones themselves were ox scapulae and turtle plastrons, selected, scraped clean, and polished before use. A diviner would carve a question into the surface about weather, military campaigns, harvests, or the health of the king. Then a heated metal rod was pressed into the bone until it cracked. The direction and shape of those cracks were interpreted as the answer from ancestral spirits. The question, the interpretation, and often the outcome were all inscribed on the same piece of bone. The record was complete before the ritual ended. The majority of inscriptions discovered so far, over 150,000 pieces, were unearthed at Inshu, the final capital of the Shang dynasty, located near modern-day Anyang in Hunan province. The site was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Location in 2006. The inscriptions span the reigns of the last 9 Shang kings, beginning with King Wuding. They are not fragmented notes or primitive symbols. They are fully grammatical sentences recording a fully functional spoken language. That maturity is what unsettles historians. Oracle bone script did not look like a system learning to walk. By the time these bones were being inscribed, the writing already included pictographs, associative compounds, and phonosemantic compounds, the same fundamental categories that exist in modern Chinese characters today. Linguists estimate that such complexity requires centuries of prior development. But no writing from before the Shang dynasty has ever been found. Whatever came before left no trace. About 4,000 distinct characters have been identified in Oracle bone script. Scholars have successfully deciphered roughly 1,400 of them. 40% of the characters are still recognizable in some form in the Chinese writing used today. That is not similarity across related systems. That is direct descent. A person reading a modern Chinese newspaper is using a script that shares its lineage with marks carved onto ox bones in 1200 BCE. The Shang dynasty fell around 1046 BCE. Oracle bone divination declined under the Zhou, replaced by other methods. The bones were buried, forgotten, and eventually broken into pieces sold as medicine. The writing survived. It never actually stopped. The Braille Code. Louis Braille blinded himself at the age of 3, not by accident of nature, by a tool in his father's workshop. A stitching awl slipped, pierced his left eye, and within months the infection had spread to both. By the time he was 5, he could not see at all. He was a saddler's son in a small village outside Paris, and the world of written language had effectively closed around him. In 1819, at the age of 10, he was admitted to the Royal Institution for Blind Youth in Paris, the youngest student the school had ever accepted. What he found there was not much of a library. The school owned 3 books. They were printed using embossed lettering, wooden blocks carved into letter shapes, and pressed into thick wax paper. A trained blind student could slowly trace each raised letter with their fingertips, 1 character at a time. Reading a single page could take an hour. Writing was not possible at all. That limitation changed in 1821 when the institution received a system developed by Charles Barbier, a former French artillery captain. Barbier's method used 12 raised dots arranged in a grid, 2 columns, 6 rows, and had been designed as a way to transmit orders in the dark, without sound or light. He called it point writing. Others would later call it night writing. When the school began trialing the system, 12-year-old Braille encountered it almost immediately. He could read it faster than embossed letters. But he also saw precisely why it would never be enough. Barbier's 12-dot grid was too large to be felt in a single fingertip impression. It required tracing rather than touching. Each symbol represented a phonetic sound, not a letter, which meant spelling was impossible. Punctuation did not exist in the system. Neither did numbers or musical notation. For a boy who also played the organ, the gaps were not minor. They were the difference between partial literacy and real literacy. Braille spent the next 3 years redesigning the system from the ground up. He cut the grid from 12 dots to 6. He assigned each cell a direct letter value. He built in provisions for punctuation, numerals, and music. At 15, he presented the completed system to his mentor, Director Pignier. The students at the institution adopted it almost immediately. The institution's cited administrators did not. For decades, Braille's system was blocked from official adoption, considered a threat to the established order of sighted designed education. Braille continued teaching there, refining his code, until tuberculosis killed him in 1852 at age 42. 2 years after his death, France formally adopted the system. By the 20th century, it had spread to virtually every written language on Earth. Today, more than 133 Braille codes exist across the world's languages. The fingertip became a reading instrument. The Wedge Writers. Before paper. Before ink. Before the alphabet, as any modern civilization understands it. There was clay, a reed, and a city in southern Mesopotamia called Uruk. Around 3200 BCE, temple administrators pressed the cut tip of a reed into wet clay and produced the first confirmed writing system in human history. They were not philosophers or poets. They were accountants. The first things humanity wrote down were lists of grain and livestock. The script is called cuneiform, derived from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. The name describes the method exactly. A scribe would hold a reed stylus and press its angled tip into a damp clay tablet, rotating slightly with each impression to produce a wedge-shaped mark. Arrangements of these marks formed signs. Signs formed words. The tablet would then be dried in the sun or fired in a kiln, hardening the record permanently. Some of the resulting tablets have survived for more than 5,000 years in near-perfect condition. Paper has not managed this. Stone, in many cases, has not either. The earliest cuneiform tablets from Uruk were purely pictographic. A drawing of a sheep meant sheep, a drawing of grain meant grain. But pictographs have limits. They can record what exists. They cannot record what is owed, promised, feared, or believed. Over the following centuries, Sumerian scribes systematically transformed the pictographs into abstract wedge-shaped signs that represented sounds rather than objects. Once writing became phonetic, language could be recorded in full. Everything changed. Cuneiform did not remain a Sumerian possession for long. As trade and conquest spread across the ancient Near East, the script traveled with them. It was adapted to write Akkadian, the Semitic language that became the dominant tongue of Babylonia and Assyria. Then Elamite, then Hittite, Hurrian, Urartian, and Old Persian. Scribes from dozens of distinct cultures used the same system to write entirely different languages, making cuneiform the first truly international script in human history. At its peak, it was in active use from modern-day Egypt to the borders of modern-day Iran. The script gave the world its first legal code, the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed around 1754 BCE. It preserved the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known work of literature. It recorded Babylonian astronomical observations so precise that scholars in 2016 confirmed they used geometric calculations once believed to have been invented in medieval Europe. Cuneiform fell out of use gradually, displaced by the more portable Aramaic alphabet following the 1st century CE. The last confirmed cuneiform inscription is an astronomical text dated to 75 CE. Then the knowledge of how to read it vanished entirely and stayed lost for nearly 2,000 years. The clay survived. The understanding did not, until the 19th century cracked it open again. The Minoan Silence. In 1900, British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating the ruins of Knossos on the island of Crete. What he uncovered reshaped everything historians believed about the origins of European civilization. Buried beneath the soil were the remains of a sophisticated Bronze Age society, with running water, multi-story architecture, elaborate frescoes, and a writing system that predated anything previously known on the continent. He named the civilization the Minoans, after the legendary Greek king Minos. Then he tried to read what they had written. He never could. The script is known as Cretan Hieroglyphs. It was in active use from approximately 2000 BCE to 1650 BCE, making it the oldest identified writing system in Europe. The signs are largely pictographic: human figures, animals, plants, tools, and abstract shapes pressed into clay seals and tablets across the island. It looks structured, it looks intentional, and it has defeated every attempt at decipherment for over a century. The surviving corpus is frustratingly small. Scholars have cataloged roughly 270 documents in total, around 150 clay seals and sealings, and about 120 additional clay objects. Together, they contain just over 1,500 individual uses drawn from approximately 96 distinct syllabic signs and 23 logograms. The inscriptions are short. Most contain only a handful of signs. For a language with no known relatives and no bilingual parallel text, that is not enough material to crack. There is no Minoan Rosetta Stone. There likely never will be. What makes the silence even more unsettling is what sits next to the hieroglyphs in the archaeological record. The Minoans also developed a second script, known as Linear A, which ran parallel to the hieroglyphic system for much of its history and eventually replaced it. Linear A also remains undeciphered. Both scripts appear to record the same unknown spoken language, a language that does not demonstrably belong to any identified language family. Scholars do not know whether the Minoans were related to the Greeks, the Anatolians, the Egyptians, or anyone else. We do not know what they called themselves. Linear A eventually gave rise to Linear B, which the Mycenaeans adapted to write an early form of Greek. Linear B was deciphered in 1952. The step backward, from Linear B to Linear A to Cretan hieroglyphs, has never been completed. The palace at Knossos was destroyed around 1450 BCE. The Minoan civilization collapsed shortly after, absorbed or displaced by the Mycenaeans. The hieroglyphs vanished with them. What remains are clay objects bearing signs that record transactions, names, or rituals in a language no living person has ever spoken, from a civilization that named itself nothing we have found. The writing survived the palace. The meaning did not make it out. The Brahmi Inheritance. In 1837, a British scholar named James Prinsep sat over a set of ancient stone inscriptions that had baffled European researchers for decades. The carvings had been found across pillars, cave walls, and rock faces spread throughout the Indian subcontinent, ordered by an emperor, clearly intentional, and completely unreadable. Prinsep cracked the script by analyzing the frequency of individual signs. When he finally decoded the message, he discovered it was not mythology or ritual. It was an emperor speaking directly to his subjects across an entire continent. The script was Brahmi. The emperor was Ashoka, and the words had been waiting in stone for over 2,000 years. Brahmi first appears in confirmed inscriptions from the 3rd century BCE, most prominently in the Edicts of Ashoka, carved between 250 and 232 BCE across the Mauryan Empire. The edicts were inscribed on pillars and rock faces from Afghanistan to southern India, public declarations of policy, ethics, and governance in a script designed to be widely understood. Ashoka had the inscriptions placed at crossroads, near populated centers, and along trade routes. The intent was legibility at scale. For that to work, the script itself had to be consistent, phonetically complete, and structurally sound. Brahmi was all three. The system is classified as an abugida, a script where each symbol represents a consonant carrying an inherent vowel sound, with diacritical marks added to indicate different vowels. It reads left to right. It is precise, logical, and adaptable. Those qualities explain what happened to it over the following millennium. As the Mauryan Empire fractured into regional kingdoms, Brahmi fractured with it, not into oblivion, but into proliferation. Northern and southern regional variants emerged. The northern branch eventually produced Gupta script, and from Gupta came Devanagari, the script used today to write Hindi, Sanskrit, Marathi, and Nepali, among others. The southern branch produced the Kadamba and Pallava scripts, which traveled along maritime trade routes through Southeast Asia and gave rise to the scripts used in Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Indonesia. Tibetan script descends from a northern Brahmi variant carried by Buddhist missionaries in the 7th century CE. One survey of world writing systems traced 198 distinct scripts back to Brahmi as their common ancestor. No other script in human history has generated that breadth of descendants across that many unrelated languages. And embedded within Brahmi numerals is something else entirely: the positional decimal system that gave rise to the Hindu-Arabic numerals used globally today. Every number typed on any keyboard in the modern world carries a structural debt to a script carved on Indian stone in the 3rd century BCE. Brahmi did not spread through conquest. It spread through trade, religion, and intellectual contact. It did not impose. It adapted. And in adapting, it became the most reproduced writing system the world has ever produced. The Arabic alphabet. The Arabic script did not begin with Islam. That association is so deeply embedded in the modern imagination that the older story rarely gets told. But the alphabet that carries the Quran, that runs across mosques from Morocco to Malaysia, that is used today by over 400 million people as their primary script, that alphabet was already centuries old before the Prophet Muhammad was born. Its origins trace back to the Nabateans, a semi-nomadic Arab people who built their kingdom around the Red Rock city of Petra in present-day Jordan between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE. The Nabateans were not known primarily as scholars. They were traders, engineers, and architects. But to manage commerce across the ancient Near East, they needed a writing system. They adopted a cursive form of Aramaic, the dominant trade language of the region, and began adapting it to their own spoken tongue. Over several centuries, that adaptation produced something distinctly new. The key transformation was a shift to cursive. Nabatean scribes, writing quickly on papyrus with ink rather than carving into stone, began connecting letters to one another in flowing strokes. Shapes simplified, letters linked. The visual architecture of the alphabet changed fundamentally. By the 3rd and 4th century CE, what had started as Aramaic had evolved, letter by letter, into something recognizable as the ancestor of Arabic script. The oldest confirmed inscription written in a fully Arabic alphabet is the Zabad inscription, dated to 512 CE, a trilingual text in Greek, Syriac, and Arabic, found in northwestern Syria. But the script still had a structural problem. The Nabatean alphabet had 22 letters designed for 22 distinct sounds. Arabic as a spoken language required 28 consonant sounds. 6 of the letters were therefore forced to carry double duty, the same shape representing 2 entirely different phonemes. As the script became more cursive and letters began to look increasingly alike, the ambiguity compounded. A reader without deep familiarity with the language could not reliably distinguish one word from another. The solution arrived with the spread of Islam in the 7th century and the urgent need to record the Quran with perfect accuracy. Scholars introduced a system of diacritical dots placed above or below letter shapes to differentiate identical forms. Short vowel sounds, previously left unmarked, received their own notation system called tactile. What had been an ambiguous consonantal script became one of the most precise writing systems in the ancient world. By the 8th century, the Arabic script was being used to write Persian, Berber, and Malay, languages from entirely different families with entirely different sound systems. It crossed geography, ethnicity, and linguistic heritage, carried not by conquest alone, but by the weight of a text that hundreds of millions believed was the direct word of God. The dots changed everything. They still do. The Greek alphabet. The Phoenicians gave the world a remarkable tool. By around 1050 BCE, they had developed a consonant-based alphabet of 22 letters, efficient, portable, and adaptable enough to travel across the Mediterranean along trade routes. It recorded sounds rather than objects or syllables. Every merchant who used it could, in principle, write anything speakable, but it had one foundational gap. It recorded only consonants. Vowels were left unwritten, implied by a reader who already knew the language. For Semitic languages like Phoenician, this worked. The consonantal skeleton of a word carried enough information for a fluent speaker to reconstruct meaning. For Greek, it did not. When Greek traders encountered the Phoenician alphabet sometime around the 9th or 8th century BCE, they saw the architecture of something extraordinary. But they also saw the problem immediately. Greek is an Indo-European language in which vowels are not recoverable from consonants alone. Removing vowels from Greek text did not produce an ambiguous skeleton. It produced near incomprehensibility. The adaptation that followed was not incremental refinement. It was a structural redesign that changed what an alphabet could do. Greek scribes took several Phoenician letters representing consonant sounds that did not exist in spoken Greek and repurposed them entirely. The letter Aleph, which represented a glottal stop in Phoenician, became alpha, a pure vowel sign for the sound A. He became epsilon, for E. Yod became iota, for I. Ayin became omicron, for O. Vav was split and adapted to produce upsilon, for U. For the first time in the history of writing, a script systematically and consistently represented both consonants and vowels as separate, equally weighted letters. The result was the first true alphabet in the strict linguistic sense, a complete phonetic system from which no sound needed to be inferred. The earliest confirmed Greek alphabetic inscriptions date to approximately 770 to 750 BCE, found on pottery from Athens and the island of Ischia. In early centuries, the script had no fixed direction. Some inscriptions ran right to left, others left to right, and some alternated line by line in a style called boustrophodon, meaning ox turning, after the way an ox plows a field. By the 5th century BCE, left to right had become the standard. In 403 BCE, Athens formally adopted the Ionic variant as the official Greek alphabet. Within 50 years, it had displaced all regional variants across the Greek-speaking world. The downstream consequences were vast. The Western variants of Greek were adapted by the Etruscans of Italy. From Etruscan came Latin. From Latin came every Western European alphabet used today. A separate branch produced Cyrillic, which now serves over 250 million people across Slavic nations. Every time a letter is typed in English, French, Spanish, German, or Russian, the key that moves is a direct descendant of a Greek scribe repurposing a Phoenician consonant sign sometime before 750 BCE. The Latin script. The oldest known sentence written in Latin is inscribed on a golden cloak pin. It reads, "Manius made me for Numerius." The pin, known as the Pre-Nest fibula, dates to approximately the 7th century BCE and was found near Rome. It is not a treaty, a law, or a poem. It is a craftsman's note to a customer, pressed into metal before Rome was an empire, before Latin was the language of a civilization. It was already being written before most of the world knew it existed. The Latin alphabet did not originate with the Romans. It arrived through the Etruscans, a sophisticated civilization that had flourished in central Italy before Rome's rise, who had themselves adapted a Western variant of the Greek alphabet brought by Euboean Greek colonists to the Italian city of Cumae. The Greeks had built their system from Phoenician. The Phoenicians had drawn from earlier Semitic scripts. By the time Latin speakers in the region of Latium adopted the Etruscan letters sometime around 700 BCE, the alphabet they received had already traveled through at least 4 civilizations and crossed several thousand years of linguistic evolution. The Romans adapted it further. The original Etruscan alphabet contained 26 letters, but the Romans initially kept only 21, discarding characters whose sounds did not exist in spoken Latin. There was no distinction between the sounds of G and K until the 3rd century BCE, when a scribe added a small vertical bar to the bottom of the letter C to create G, placing it in the position previously occupied by Z, which had been dropped because Latin had no use for it. Letters shifted. Sounds were disambiguated. Y and Z were later reintroduced, borrowed back from Greek to accommodate the flood of Greek loanwords entering Latin during the Roman era of Greece in the 1st century BCE. The alphabet that emerged was precise, adaptable, and, critically, tied to the administrative machinery of the most expansive empire in Western history. As Rome expanded across Europe, the Latin alphabet followed. It replaced existing writing systems in Gaul, Iberia, and North Africa. When the empire collapsed in the 5th century CE, the alphabet did not fall with it. The Catholic Church carried it into Germanic territories, Ireland, and the Slavic nations during the medieval missionary period. The letter W was invented in Anglo-Saxon England. Lowercase letters emerged from medieval scribal traditions. The Carolingian minuscule script, standardized under Charlemagne in the 8th century, became the direct ancestor of the typefaces used in printing today. European colonization then carried all of it outward, across the Americas, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. Languages with no historical connection to Rome, Greece, or Phoenicia now write themselves in letters that trace back to a craftsman's inscription on a pin. The note survived. So did the alphabet. The first alphabet. They were not scribes. They were miners. Somewhere around 1850 BCE, Semitic-speaking workers, most likely Canaanites, labored in Egyptian-controlled turquoise and copper mines at Serabit el-Khatham, a remote plateau in the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt surrounded them. Egyptian overseers directed them. Egyptian hieroglyphs covered the temple walls above the mine shafts where they worked. And somewhere in that environment of borrowed symbols and foreign language, they made a decision that quietly restructured the entire future of human communication. They took Egyptian hieroglyphs, a complex, priestly system requiring years of training, and stripped them to their bones. A drawing of an ox's head became a sign for the sound at the start of the Semitic word for ox. A drawing of a house became the sound at the start of the Semitic word for house. A drawing of water became the sound at the start of the Semitic word for water. Sign after sign was repurposed through this single principle. Take the picture, translate the name into your own language, and use only the first consonant. The result was not a syllabary or a logographic system. It was an alphabet, roughly 27 to 30 signs representing individual sounds, sufficient to write any word in any Semitic language. The system is now called Proto-Sinaitic. The inscriptions found at Serabit el-Khatham are crude, scratched quickly into rock, not the polished monuments of a professional scribal tradition. That crudeness is the point. This was not a script invented by scholars. It was invented by workers who needed to write and had no access to the machinery of elite literacy. Simplicity was a deliberate design principle. Anyone could learn it. By approximately 1050 BCE, this system had been standardized into the Phoenician alphabet, 22 letters, all consonants, written right to left. The Phoenicians were not empire builders. They were merchants, navigating trade routes across the entire Mediterranean. Everywhere their ships carried goods, the alphabet traveled with them. The Greeks encountered it around the 8th century BCE and added vowels, producing the first complete phonetic alphabet. From Greek came Latin. From Latin came every Western European writing system in use today. A separate Aramaic branch gave rise to Arabic, Hebrew, and the Brahmic scripts of South Asia. In 1904, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie excavated Serabit el-Khatham and recovered the first Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions. In 1916, linguist Alan Gardiner partially deciphered them by identifying the recurring word BLT, meaning lady, a Semitic title for the Egyptian goddess Hathor worshipped at the site. The miners had been carving prayers. In doing so, they created the ancestor of almost every alphabet currently in use on Earth. The letter A in the word you are reading right now descends directly from a picture of an ox's head scratched into a mine wall nearly 4,000 years ago. The Cyrillic Code. In 862 CE, a Slavic prince named Rastislav sent an urgent message to Constantinople. His kingdom of Great Moravia was caught between two competing powers, the Frankish Church pushing Latin liturgy from the west, and the Byzantine Empire pressing its influence from the east. Rastislav was not asking for soldiers. He was asking for something more durable. He requested missionaries who could speak to his people in their own language. The Byzantine Emperor Michael III sent two brothers from Thessaloniki. One of them would give his name to an alphabet he almost certainly never personally designed. Cyril, born Constantine, later taking the monk's name Cyril before his death, and his older brother Methodius arrived in Moravia in 863. Their first task was not preaching. It was linguistic. The Slavic languages contained sounds that neither the Greek nor the Latin alphabet could represent. Before any sermon could be delivered or any scripture translated, a new writing system had to be built from the ground up. Cyril created one. Scholars now believe it was the Glagolitic script, an original alphabet with distinct, angular letters designed specifically to capture the full phonetic range of spoken Slavic. It was the first writing system ever created for any Slavic language. Glagolitic was used between 863 and 885 to translate the Gospels, the Psalter, and essential liturgical texts into Old Church Slavonic. When Methodius died in 884 and the Frankish clergy expelled his disciples from Moravia, those disciples carried both the translations and the script south into the Bulgarian Empire. There, at the Preslav Literary School, scholars including Saints Naum and Clement of Ohrid took a different approach. Rather than teaching the uniquely shaped Glagolitic letters, they constructed a new alphabet modeled on the more familiar Greek uncial letters, adding additional characters for Slavic sounds with no Greek equivalent. That alphabet contained 43 letters at its origin. They named it Cyrillic, in honor of the man whose mission had made it necessary. Cyrillic spread rapidly across Eastern Orthodox Slavic territories, into Bulgaria, Serbia, and eventually into Kievan Rus in 988 CE, following the Christianization of the region. In 1710, Peter the Great reformed the script for secular use, creating what he called civil type, eliminating letters deemed redundant and modernizing the letter forms to resemble Western European print. Russia standardized it further after the 1917 revolution, removing 4 additional letters. Today, Cyrillic is the official script of 11 countries and has been adapted to write over 50 languages, including Mongolian, Kazakh, Uzbek, and Tajik, languages that share no linguistic ancestry with Slavic. Around 250 million people use it as their primary writing system. A prince asked for a voice. Two brothers built him an alphabet. The alphabet outlasted everything that asked for it.